Morning 3S. This is our very final instalment of Stig of the Dump. I hope you have enjoyed it. Let's pick up where we left off yesterday. And then he saw, just beside him on the hillside, a scrubby thorn tree, weather-beaten and stunted, but with strong roots clutching the earth. "Stig!" he gasped. "The tree!" Stig looked round and saw. With one hairy arm, Stig reached out and grabbed the trunk of the tree. The rope was wrapped around his other wrist, and his bones seemed to crackle as his arms took the strain. But the brake rope stopped moving forward. Trying not to fumble, Barney passed the end of the rope twice around the little tree and he pulled it. And Stig grinned as he saw that he could let go. The hide rope stretched, the roots of the tree strained in the ground, but Barney let himself look at the stone and saw that it wasn't moving. And then Lou appeared from under the tilted stone, followed by Dina and carrying a naked, black-haired Stig baby. The king shouted impatiently. Barney let the end of the rope run out round the tree trunk. The great slab fell forward with a hollow sound onto the tops of the standing stones. And over the shoulder of the downs appeared a red spark, and the valley was flooded with light. It was sunrise. From the low mist in the bottom of the valley appeared the spire of a church, the tops of houses and electricity pylons. The solid forest was gone, and there were the squares of cornfields, orchards and hop gardens. There were the villages and the distant chimneys of cement works, and the broad ribbon of the main road sweeping down the hill below. Barney looked around the hillside. The people of the tribe had disappeared. There were no huts, no sign of a campfire. They had all vanished with the last shades of darkness. But one thing hadn't changed. 3 stones with the great slab on top were still standing before him, weathered now, with moss growing on top of them. The mound was not there, but the stones stood just as they had done when he had let go of the last rope. Sitting against them was Lou, blinking her eyes at the rising sun, as if she were waking from a deep sleep and holding Dina in her arms. "Barney, I have had such a funny dream," said Lou. "I'm glad I've woken up, though." "So did I," said Barney. "Are you sure that we've woken up?" Lou looked round. "Well, I dreamt about a tribe of people long ago," she said. "They've all gone, and now, so it must have been a dream." "What are we doing here, then?" asked Barney. Lou opened her eyes at that. "Good gracious," she said. "We don't usually wake up on top of a hill, do we?" She curled herself up at the foot of the stone and shut her eyes. "I think I'm going to try and dream myself back into my bed," she said. Barney shook her. "Get up, Lou," he said. "It isn't that sort of dream at all. We really are here. We've got to get back to Granny's somehow." Barney knew that it was something more than a dream. The tiredness in his arms and legs told him that he really had been hauling the great stone that looked as if it had been there for thousands of years. He walked around to the front of the stones, where the open side looked over the valley, and there, sitting in the entrance, as if he was on his own front porch, was Stig. Barney gasped and Stig grinned. Lou put her head round the stone and gasped too. "Stig," she said, "what are you doing here?" "If you're a midsummer fairy, or whatever the others were, you are supposed to have vanished." "But I told you," said Barney. "Stig's always here. He's my friend." Barney and Lou have almost forgotten how they got back to the house that summer morning. They remember catching the pony who was grazing peacefully on the hilltop and riding back half asleep, clitter-clatter through the empty lanes, with Stig walking beside them. And they remember falling into their beds and waking very late on Midsummer Day. Probably, they agreed, on the way back, not to say anything about what had happened. Anyhow, what would they say? It wasn't until quite a long time later that they went with their parents for a picnic on the North Downs, where the 4 stones stand. And as they ate their sandwiches, their parents got into an argument about Stone Age and Bronze Age, and about how the stones had got there. Until Barney said without thinking, "Well, they had splint spears, and it was the heave-ho that did it." And everybody thought about this quite a lot and had to admit that Barney was probably right, though they couldn't think about how he knew. And then Barney and Lou said together, "I wonder how the baby got there." And that was a question that nobody could answer. And what about Stig? Well, if you ask Barney, he will say in an offhand manner that he's still living in the dump. The grown-ups never really knew just how real he was, but they got used to the idea that whenever there was a pile of an old thrown-away things, an unseen Stig was likely to be poking around in it. And whenever there was a particularly odd job to be done, like making sure a rainwater butt didn't spring a leak when it was empty and overflow when it was full, or a new tool for lifting parsnips, then someone would say, let's get Stig to fix it. Actually, the dump's filling up fast now, and Stig may be on the move. One report was that he'd been seen working at a garage by the main road, where they collect old wrecked cars and put the pieces in rusty piles. And somebody else said they saw him in a back lane of that woody country at the top of the downs, mending a chicken run with an old wire mattress. It certainly sounded like Barney's friend Stig, but perhaps it was only a relative of his. Who knows? Right, yes, that is the end of the book. I hope you've really enjoyed it. What you could do now is you could write a book review. So you could tell us all about how you felt about the book. What were your best bits? What bits were you not so keen on? What do you think actually happened? Was Stig real? Is he still there? Did they dream the whole thing? What do you think? Have a go, see if you can do it, and if you can, send them through to me and Mrs. Arlo because we would love to see them. We will see you soon. Bye-bye.